Hi, hello beautiful people. My name is Lauren and welcome back to my channel. I haven't done a wrap up in forever, but today that is exactly what we're doing. So I am so excited to film my January TBR because I actually read a good amount of books. I haven't had this successful reading month in ages. Everyone knows how 2021 went for me and it wasn't great, but so far 2022 is off to a great start because I read 8 books in the month of January and I really enjoyed pretty much all of them. Now, the sad thing is that most of the books I was able to read weren't the ones that I had on my January TBR from my physical shelves, but I did read one of them and it was one that I absolutely adored and I'm so glad I got to it. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it first, and it is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. So this is the last book I read in the month of January and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 big giant stars. This is the definition of a page-turning psychological thriller because you get little bits and pieces of the story and you won't know who did it until you're about to get the reveal. So let me tell you a little bit about what this story is about. It follows a group of people who are attending their college reunion after 10 years. And we follow the perspective of Jessica, who is one of these people in this friend group. And 10 years before their senior year of college, one of their best friends was murdered. She was discovered dead in her room. One of the other friends was actually accused of committing the crime, but they weren't actually convicted of it because there wasn't enough evidence. And so now that they're going back to this 10-year reunion, the brother of the victim is trying to figure out who did it. He's been investigating all these years. He's telling them that he's got these clues and he is determined for the real killer, who he believes to be one of them, to come forward and admit what they did. These people are pretentious, they're full of themselves, they are also, you know, really selfish and self-serving, and I just think that this was the perfect setting. The way that Ashley Winstead wrote the setting for this story, you can literally visualize the campus setting, you can visualize the characters. It plays out like a movie in your head, and I think that those are my favorite kinds of books when an author can do that, because if I have to reread a scene to be able to picture what's happening in my head multiple times, then it's not exactly doing what it's supposed to do, I don't think. Ashley Winstead just did a phenomenal job with this debut. I don't think you're going to necessarily guess who did it unless you are just lucky in the beginning, because like I said, you don't get necessarily all of the pieces of the puzzle until right up to that revealing moment. And then there's obviously this big kind of plot twist ending at the very end that just leaves you thinking, wow. The most interesting thing about this story, I think, is the timeline, because you do get a dual timeline. You get the current point of view, obviously, where they're going to the reunion and the brother is trying to figure out who did this, but you also get perspectives from the past, and it's not necessarily linear, but you get the perspective that is the most relevant to what's going on in the current day, and those little pieces of the puzzle are what keeps you kind of in the dark about who could have possibly done this until that very moment before the reveal actually happens. And I just think that it was plotted and paced so well. Ashley Winstead actually has a romance and another thriller coming out this year in 2022 that I've seen some pretty good reviews for so far of the people who have read the ARC copies of those, and I am very excited to get to those. But I definitely recommend you read this if you haven't yet, because I have no doubt that you will absolutely love it. These next 2 books, I keep forgetting that I own them physically because I have the special editions that I don't want to touch very often, but it is A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire and The Crown of Gilded Bones, both by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which are the 2nd and 3rd books in the From Blood and Ash series. And obviously I wanted to read these before the 4th book, The War of Two Queens, comes out in March. And I rated A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire 3.5 stars, and The Crown of Gilded Bones got 4 stars for me. So the reason A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire got only 3.5 stars for me was because of the pacing. The beginning of this story is so slow. We're in the same place for the first 50% of the book. We're doing the same things, we're having the same conversations, and it just got too much, too repetitive, too boring for me. And then once we got towards the end, and obviously the huge plot twist at the end of the story, I wanted to know what happened. I couldn't put it down. And so for that, I had to at least give it the 3.5 stars. I think at first I was going to rate it 4 stars, but when I got to The Crown of Gilded Bones and saw how much I enjoyed it, how much more I enjoyed it than A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, I knew I needed to lower my rating for this one. But The Crown of Gilded Bones starts off ramped up because it starts off immediately from the plot twist in the first book, and then it does slow down a little bit in the middle, but when you get to the end, there's so much happening that your mind is just blown. I think that these 2 books also suffer a lot from extensive world building because Poppy as a main character does not know anything about what's going on, and so she has a lot of questions. And the way that Jennifer L. Armentrout world builds is that Poppy asks a question about something she doesn't know, and someone else has this really extensive monologue about what happened in the past or what led to this event. And I think that there are definitely better ways to build your world than that. And another problem that I have with these stories is that a lot of the same jokes are recycled. We get the same jokes about Poppy's violence or her asking constant questions over and over, and I guess maybe Jennifer L. Armentrout is kind of trying to poke fun at herself, but eventually those jokes lose their impact. And I also think a lot of the dialogue scenes could be cut shorter so that they have more impact, because sometimes they get carried on for too long. Like, you might get someone telling Poppy something and literally she responds, okay. The okay part is not necessary. Like, just kind of carry on through the rest of the conversation. I think there's a lot of words being added in that aren't necessary, but I think that we've got most of our world building down, and I definitely need to pick up the prequel series to this because I know there's going to be a lot of world building in that I might need for the War of Two Queens before it comes out. I'm hoping that the War of Two Queens is going to have much more of the action now that we've got a lot of the character building and world building in place already, and there will be less of that info dumpy, long world building monologue type writing style. I'm very, very hopeful about that. But I did enjoy these. They're definitely not my favorite, but I do enjoy this series and the concept and the premise behind it, and the characters are just done so well. The idea of this world that Jennifer L. Armentrout has come up with is really fantastic. I just think the execution of it could use some tweaking that would make it more universally loved by people. The next 3 books I'm going to talk about only a little bit because I do have a vlog where I talk about them more extensively, but it is the 3 books I read in the month of January by Colleen Hoover, which are All Your Perfects, Verity, and Reminders of Him. So All Your Perfects is a story that follows a couple who is struggling with infertility, and we do have a dual timeline from when the couple first meets versus now when they're suffering through these problems in their marriage. And this story was absolutely heartbreaking. I didn't expect it to get so heavy so quickly, so definitely take precaution when you go into this story because it is a heavy-hitting one, and it is the only one of these 3 that I gave a full 5 stars to. I think Colleen Hoover handled this topic very, very well. I also feel like the trajectory of the story was done well. I can't say too much on that because obviously I don't want to spoil what happens for anyone, but I like that she took it in a way that you don't necessarily expect it to go. And then we have Verity, which is very much a page turner. You just absolutely want to know what's going to happen because there's just so many shocking things that happen throughout. But this follows a young writer who lives in New York City, and she has come upon some money issues. She has a meeting with her agent and another publisher who publishes books for a woman named Verity, who has this very, very popular series that she's in the middle of. But Verity has just had an accident and she is medically unable to finish the series, so her husband wants to commission someone to finish the series for her as a co-author. And so they decide that our main character needs to move into Verity's home with her husband and Verity and go through Verity's office and look at her notes and try to figure out what's the best route that the story should take. And some wild things go on. She finds Verity's manuscript, and you can't believe what you're reading in this woman that goes on in this woman's head. And I will just say that I did not care too much for the way it ended. You can definitely hear more of my thoughts on that in my vlog. I know that a lot of people really, really enjoy this one, and I think that's just because of the, I can't believe this is happening, I can't believe I'm reading this aspect of it. Plus it's so unexpected from Colleen Hoover, who obviously writes mostly romance. But I'd definitely be interested to read more of her romantic thriller suspense type stories. I don't know if I'm going to read Layla because I've heard terrible things about that one. This definitely is one that will stay with me for a while, but I definitely don't think it's going to be like a favorite thriller of mine. And then finally, I read Colleen Hoover's newest release, which is Reminders of Him. And this follows a woman who is just getting out of prison. She's trying to get custody of her daughter. And we get little bits and pieces of what happened, why she's in prison, why she doesn't have custody of her daughter. And she's gone to this town and she is seeking the help of a man who owns a bar there to hopefully get custody of her daughter. It's a really heartbreaking story. There's definitely some trigger warnings for grief and loss of a loved one, so you should definitely look into those before you pick this up. With each of these stories, I think what I've learned about Colleen Hoover's writing is that she can very much write main characters who you both love and are also frustrated with, and I think that plus her very bingeable writing style is what makes her so easily beloved. And you also never really know what to expect because each of her stories are so different. There's not necessarily a formula to them. I'm definitely going to be reading more from her in the future. There are definitely a few of her stories that I still have on my radar, but I don't know that she's necessarily established herself as one of my favorite authors just yet. And then next, I listened on audio to Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is one that I've been listening to for a while. I have to take it kind of in bits and pieces here and there, kind of because of the topic that it follows. Chanel Miller was the victim in the Stanford sexual assault case that was hugely publicized here in the United States. And the way that she recounts what happened to her and how it affected her relationships with her family and her boyfriend and herself was inspiring because she went through so much with that being such a highly publicized case. People had so many opinions about her without even knowing her, without even knowing who she truly was, because she was called Emily Doe throughout the process of the trial because she wanted to keep her anonymity. But this is her kind of putting her name out there. She wants you to know who she is, know what she's went through and how she fought through all of that. The words that she writes is so powerful. Her mother was also a writer and she has a history in slam poetry, and that just really comes through in the writing. There are some really powerful quotes in here surrounding rape culture and the expectations of women and finding your way back from such a dark place. I think it is truly remarkable what she did with this story in writing it, the voice that she took back, the voice that she is encouraging for other women to have. And I think her particular writing style definitely packs a punch as you're listening to her recount this awful thing that happened to her. I didn't read this story, but I definitely think that it is one that everyone should pick up. And I'd highly recommend the audiobook because Chanel narrates the audiobook herself, and hearing the narration in her own words is to me the best way to consume this memoir. And then finally, one of my favorite books of the month is Finlay, Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. So this was the Lou Fantasma pick for the month of January, and it was a big hit with everyone. I personally gave it 5 stars, and this is a cozy mystery that follows Finlay Donovan, who is a mystery writer, and she has hit a bit of writer's block. She has a lot going on. She's going through a divorce because her husband cheated on her. Her daughter is a big daddy's girl, and so she's constantly having to hear from her how wonderful her husband is. And then she is struggling a bit financially as well, and so she has a lot going on, not a lot of time for writing. So she meets her agent at a Panera, and they're talking about this mystery novel that she's writing, and someone overhears and thinks that Finlay is actually a hit woman for hire. And so this person reaches out to Finlay and says, hey, I need you to kill my husband and I will give you $50,000 cash if you are successful at doing that. And so Finlay is thrust into this wild, over-the-top, unbelievable scenario that is just so much fun. There is hilariousness that ensues, and there is even a little bit of a romance plot throughout the story. And one of the best side characters to ever exist is Vero, who is Finlay's unexpected newfound best friend and her nanny, and it is just a wild ride. Something I found out about myself is that I really do enjoy cozy mysteries, but I think this is definitely the one that I've enjoyed the most so far, and I'm really looking forward to picking up the sequel, especially because there is a huge plot twist cliffhanger ending that I did not see coming. Everyone was talking about it and I just couldn't I never would have guessed that that's what it was. I also would highly recommend the audiobook. I know some people weren't exactly a fan of the narrator style, but I saw more people enjoying it than not, and I personally consumed it that way and really enjoyed it. And I'm just very excited to get to the sequel, because I think what happens sometimes with these particular series, you see the first book become really well loved, and then the rest of the story may not live up to the hype of that first series. So I'll be very interested to see what I think about the rest of the quartet, because I do believe it's going to be 4 books. I've heard some good things about the second book, and I'm really looking forward to getting to it in February and seeing what kind of chaos Finlay finds herself in the future. And so those were the 8 books I read in the month of January. Like I said, January was the best reading month that I had in a really long time, and it makes me really excited for the rest of 2022. I hope that success carries on throughout the rest of the year, all the way through December. I got to some books that I've been wanting to read for a really long time, so I'm super excited that I got to do that. But please let me know if you have read any of the books that I read in the month of January, and tell me what you thought of them, or tell me if you plan to pick any up based on what I've said about them here today. And of course, I need to make sure you check out the description, where you can find links to my socials and some other resources like my book of the month link or Scribd link if you're interested in checking either of those out. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.
I was down until you saved me, until you set me free. My eyes were closed, now I see clear as day, and I just wanted to say that you can take me high.